Hi, welcome. My name is Senthil Veeraraghavan, and my talk is on fulfillment by platforms, particularly dealing with antitrust concerns and that are emerging through platform growth. This is joint work with two PhD students, Amandeep Singh at Wharton and Jiding Zhang, who's also at Wharton, moving to NYU Shanghai. Recently, platforms and monopolies have been a big concern. And in the last summer, we saw several articles that are in popular press talking about whether large platform e-commerce companies such as Amazon are violating U.S. antitrust laws and whether there is a monopoly busting case against the big four tech firms. In fact, this culminated in antitrust hearings on Capitol Hill in the summer. The report just came back about 2 weeks back. And our focus is actually on a pretty narrow specific policy issue that concerns with fulfillment. Essentially, we ask the larger question is whether supply chains and supply chain coordination information can shed light on antitrust issues, specifically talking about can fulfillment capabilities, which is considered as a narrow operational capability, can they change platform growth concerns? In order to answer this question, it is actually helpful to look at a blast from the past and talking about dropshipping research from the last decade. In fact, let's look at the dropshipping paper that's most well-cited paper by Randall, Nettison, and Rudy in Management Science, 2006. And I report few citations from the article and also the interviews done by the authors related to generation of the data set in the article. The authors conducted several interviews and did analysis on about 54 publicly traded internet retailers and a variety of consumer goods. And they found that firms that were using dropshipping were highly correlated with success, and they saw in the coming future a great potential for dropshipping. However, in the data set, there was one firm that quickly discovered that the existing wholesalers could not meet the requirements for speed, transparency, and real-time order data and created its own fulfillment system. No points for guessing, and 15 years later, it turns out dropshipping is mostly gone. Most of the firms in the data set are now bankrupt. In fact, the one company that we talked about that decided to go and build its own warehouse was Amazon. In fact, Amazon started its fulfillment capabilities by introducing a third-party fulfillment service called Fulfillment by Amazon, by which Amazon actually picks up third-party goods and delivers them through their logistic network to the end item consumer. In fact, other platforms such as Alibaba and Walmart e-commerce platform also have their own fulfillment services called the Sino and e-fulfillment service, respectively. The question is fulfillment by platform or fulfillment by merchant seems to be a very inconsequential part of the larger decision a firm is making. For example, if you're a vendor, you can sell your goods and fulfill yourself, FBM, fulfillment by merchant, and maybe it's even cheaper. It's not clear whether you can provide a fast and high quality service. On the other hand, you can go to Amazon, use their network of warehouses, and the platform will take care of the entire fulfillment for you. It's called FPP. Maybe it's better service. For definite, it is higher access to the market. Many vendors, many suppliers facing this choice and the difficulty of building their fulfillment network perhaps often go and use the fulfillment by the platform, paying a fee for their service. Does this actually drive some antitrust and monopoly concerns that we are seeing now? Now, to answer the question, typically antitrust questions are begun by asking whether a firm is considered a monopoly, and we can ask whether is Amazon a monopoly. It depends on how you measure market share, and it's actually a fairly simple question that has very nuanced and complicated answer. Here's a slide from Benedict Evans, which actually talks about whether Amazon's market share is 15% if you consider only their first-party sales, which is only like 50% of their entire GMV. Or if you consider the entire sales by Amazon, it's 35% of US market share on e-commerce alone. But if you consider brick and mortar and e-commerce together and only first-party sales, it's less than 5%. And in fact, compared to Walmart, they are only half the size of Walmart. Now, this makes it very complicated to answer a straight-up question on what is the market share of Amazon and whether they are a monopoly when you look at only the retail market size. The second thing that complicates this very much is most of the monopolies are often driven by pricing considerations and have pricing flexibility to extract consumer welfare, and they have very low consumer goodwill and so on. But if you look at Amazon data, they're actually among the most admired companies in the United States. Now, this complicates antitrust concerns. Just to give you a background of the evolution of the antitrust literature, it starts with Clayton Act, perhaps in 1914, and the Robinson-Patman Act that prevents predatory pricing and integration across business lines. The standard for regulatory actions in the United States, often considered as Chicago School of Thought, goes back to Bork, 1978, who wrote this famous book on antitrust paradox, which argues that the intent of the antitrust laws, as well as economic efficiency, makes it that the consumer welfare and protection of competition as the primary concern rather than competitors. Recently, going back to Lina Khan in 2017, there's been some discussion around Amazon's antitrust paradox, which argues that there is market imbalance and predatory pricing created by large growth of platform firms, and we need to think about newer measures to measure competitive effects on retail firms. And this is a highly debatable legal concept. In fact, there are many perspectives on this, not all agreeable to each other. And there is a recent paper by a colleague of mine, Herbert Alan Kahn, which talks about the regulatory effects on platforms. What's the goal of our work? Our work highlights the dilemma with some new evidence. We actually argue that platforms do drive high consumer welfare, but also create upstream monopolies. So if you measure the retail market, of course, you don't see the effect, but if you measure the upstream market side on the supply chains, you see a big effect. So our main focus is to answer the following questions. Use the supply chain metrics of upstream suppliers and their service metrics, the delivery by platforms, to shed some light on recent antitrust debate in legal and policy circles. Just to give you a preview of your findings, are these antitrust concerns valid? There's actually some evidence to worry about the competitive landscape. Consumer welfare from platform services are actually better. However, the upstream supply chain components have created more monopolies. Now, how do we put together some specific questions we can answer related to the additional demand for merchants through FBP is, should small vendors be worried about their market share? Our answer is yes. Is there additional things and additional costs that are involved in taking care of their concerns? Yeah, fulfillment capabilities are harder to build, and that creates a competitive difference. Now, what are the implications of fulfillment by platforms to overall market structure? It seems that even though fulfillment seems to be a very, very small part of actual delivery process to the consumer and the quality of the product that is consumed by the consumer, it actually can drive big upstream dominance. And let me give you a brief overview of the talk. Let's start with the data, the model, and then discuss our main results and some counterfactuals and implications of our findings and conclude our paper. We have data from a platform, our partner platform. We're just going to call it our platform. And this data considers one product category, but a huge GMV by volume, which is about $40 million. And it's transaction records with price, quantity, whether a merchant used the platform services for fulfillment, and the delivery speed at which the fulfillment was done. And in fact, in the 6-month period we are looking at this, there is a lot of variation, and the daily fulfillment by platform usage by the merchants varies a lot, as low as 0.2 or 20% to sometimes about 60%. On average, about 40% of the orders are managed by the platform and the rest by the vendors. So what do? We build a structural model on both demand and supply sides of the model, and ask the following questions. The model on the consumer's side observes their choices after observing product characteristics and infers the value of platform fulfilled orders. And the model on the merchant side is a Nash-Bertrand price setting game, and we infer cost structures through them. Of course, the counterfactual will be simulate the unavailability of platform services for for vendors that choose the platform services and look at what the prices might have been. Model demand by a utility customer or I gets from buying product J at time T, which is given by some observed product characteristics and the price effects, and then there is unobserved product characteristics effects, and of course idiosyncratic noise. Now, the problem with having few product characteristics for a large data set is it's very difficult to find rich product characteristics in an applied context, and that can lead to poor counterfactual predictions, as we know from other literature. So some solutions involve constructing synthetic characteristics like Nevo does in 97 paper, or even create and learn some latent product characteristics, or look into high dimensional product fixed effects, which is essentially what we're going to be. So in our demand side model, we get a utility if FPP was adopted by the merchant using the platform and the price the customer pays. Some SKU level fixed effects, item fixed effects, merchant level fixed effects, that is product J is sold by a merchant M, and then market level fixed effects, which could be the time effect in terms of the day of the week and the day of the month in our data set, along with unobserved product characteristics. Now, using our demand model and the supply side model that we create, where the marginal cost of producing product J at time T for a merchant is going to be CJT. If he uses FPP, there is a gamma effect, and then there is a product characteristic or item level fixed effect, merchant level fixed effect, and again the market fixed effect. We combine the supply side model with the demand side model. And one way to think about this is basically the following. Say two merchants, one large merchant, one small merchant, as seen in this picture, are competing. They are essentially thinking about what prices to charge for the product, and given their production and the choice of whether they are going to be using FBP or selling it by themselves. So these are the choices that they have, and using those choices, now we can solve the Nash-Bertrand game, which gives us first order conditions and the ability to infer their market and fixed cost. The instruments that we use to figure out the exact differences between the merchants and their capabilities is the warehouses, where they're located, the transshipment time between the nodes. And we have very detailed data of origination of the products and the destination of the products and the number of hops they go through the supply network, which helps us identify using the closeness centrality of the merchants selling the same item, the difference between. For price endogeneity effects, to study them and to resolve them, we use lag price of other merchants. So just to give you our results, and we have demand estimates using a logitype model and using our full model. But I'm going to jump straight into marginal cost analysis. If the merchant uses FPP, it costs them $1.25 more in terms of delivering the final product to the consumers. And this is actually costly for different merchants in different ways. So using this kind of cost inference that we got from our supply-demand matching model, we can figure out what is the cost of a merchant no longer being able to use FPP and their potential changes on their cost structure. If that happens, customers adjust their purchase decisions. We study the outcome based on prices that might happen, or a market structure, how it might change, and things like how the competitive environment changes. So first implication of the market structure is FPP leads to about 4% increase in prices, adoption of FPP by a merchant, and 6% increase if some merchants adopt FPP, which is fulfillment by the platform. There is increase in the competitive skewness, which is measured by HHI, and and the market is much more skewed towards larger firms and larger suppliers than smaller. So you can see these market structures. In fact, the larger merchants whose total shares exceed 80th percentile have, on average, their shares increase by about 8%. If you look at the smaller merchants who have who are below the 20th percentile in the market, their average share decreases by 1%. So the question we can ask is, how do small and big merchants respond to the fulfillment ability? Let's say, think about a merchant who is called a little shop, who is a little merchant. He is selling product A, price charged by the small retailer is something, and he has a certain cost of the product, and he gets very thin margins. And he has some options to figure out whether to use FBP or not. If he uses FBP, it adds a net fee to him, which increases his overall cost. To make up for the cost, he has to increase the prices and make up margins. And maybe he has better margins than before, but he has to slightly increase his prices to face the additional complexity of the FBP. Whereas a larger merchant selling the same product, a big retailer, let's say he has a certain price, and because of his scale of economy, he has a lower cost. And we see this in our exploration of the empirical cost of the merchants. And FBP is charged on them, which reduces their margin, of course, which increases their prices a little bit, but their markup is still pretty healthy. Because of this, essentially, we face a scenario where consumers are buying, the smaller merchants are at a higher competitive price disadvantage than bigger merchants are, which leads to bigger merchants having higher markup in their benefits. So we see this play in the way how prices are varied by big merchants adopting FBP, fulfillment by platform, versus smaller merchants adopting fulfillment by platform. The larger merchants increase their prices about 26 cents in Chinese yuan, and the smaller merchants about 2 yuan and 35 cents, which is actually about 7 times more than the pressure that the big merchants face, which is essentially the summary of our finding. Are the antitrust concerns that people are talking about valid? It just seems that if you look at the retail level, they seem to be superfluous, but there is evidence to worry about the competitive landscape in the upstream level. However, consumer welfare from platform services are better. Service is better, delivery speeds are better, and therefore consumer welfare is actually better. So we are in a very complicated and nuanced dilemma in which the upstream supply chain competition has become more monopolistic, whereas the downstream consumer welfare has increased, which is an unusual supply chain format, and therefore supply chain, along with fulfillment by platforms, creates some tensions in the upstream supply chain, and that gets transferred through the fee charged by the platforms. The question is, does using the FBP option bring additional demand for merchants? And should small vendors be worried about market share? Yes, that's evidence that is suggested by our research. Have any? And to summarize, antitrust concerns are very important, and I think they're playing a big role in current discussion of bigger firms and platforms. And hopefully, through supply chain analysis, we are able to shed some concern over antitrust considerations and regulatory considerations around e-commerce and brick-and-mortar commerce. Thank you.